This is the Coleman Sundome. It's currently the #1 best-selling tent on Amazon. This is the 6-person version of this tent, and it's also the best of 4 different Coleman tents that I've tested so far this year. However, this tent does have one major flaw that I think will make most people think twice before buying it, and so we're going to go through my full review here. We'll see what's included with this tent, how you set it up, and the main pros and cons. Let's get started. Now here's everything you get with the tent. First of all, let's start with the stakes. So you get 14 of these, which is a pretty good amount, and I would say they are slim to medium thickness. And then if we move on to the poles, you get 3 poles here. 2 are for the main body of the tent and 1 is for the rain fly. This here is basically a doormat made out of polyethylene that you can put your shoes on outside the tent, basically just a little add-on here. And then here's the body of the tent, and the rain fly is wrapped up in there. We'll talk more about that later. Up here, let me just pull this down. You also get inside the bag when the tent comes to you, these 2 little straps that it's just tied up in. And then this, of course, is the bag of the tent. I would say it's not a very easy stuff sack to get the tent back into when you pack it away, and I found that with a lot of Coleman tents. Now here are the instructions. It does come with instructions sewn onto the inside of the stuff sack. This is what that looks like, so that's everything you get. Now let's talk about the setup process. To get this tent set up, what you have to do is first just take everything out, lay it out, and then set up the poles. There are 2 main fiberglass poles here, and they go over the top in an X shape. There are sleeves at the top of the tent, so make sure you feed those poles through the sleeves before fastening the corners of each pole into the pins in the corners of the fabric part of the tent. Once you get that going, then you can go ahead and stake down the base of the tent, and then your next step here is going to be the rain fly. For this rain fly, you do have a pole that goes across the middle of it. There's some Velcro straps there that you can use to fix that pole in place, and then there are also Velcro straps that go from the inside of the rain fly onto the poles, and there's clips that go down to the corners of the tent here. Then you could go ahead and do the guy lines, and once you get all of the guy lines staked in, then that pretty much wraps up the setup of this tent. Now let's talk about pros and cons, starting with pro number 1, and that would be the price of this tent. This tent costs about $100 right now for the 6-person version, which is about as cheap as you could possibly get for something of this size. Now the 4-person version is a bit cheaper at about $82, and the 2-person version is a very affordable $60. And so if you're looking for something that is on the very budget end of the spectrum when it comes to price, this is definitely something that gives you that. Another thing that this tent has going for it is the living space on the inside. It's actually pretty good. So you get about 98 square feet of room on the floor. That is about 2 square feet less than the manufacturer rating, which is 100. But at any rate, you get about enough room for 4 to 5 people to fit in a manageable way, but you would be, I think, very comfortable with 2 to 3 people in here, especially if you want to pack in quite a bit of gear. It could physically fit 7 people if you really just packed people in as tight as possible, but you probably aren't going to want to do that. The stand height of this tent is also pretty good. It's 6 feet tall, and so at 5'10", I'm able to stand up fully in the middle of this tent, but you can really only do that at the very center of the tent. As soon as you start walking side to side, you quickly run out of headroom because of the slope of the dome style, and so that's just kind of something that you have to expect. Another thing I wanted to mention as a pro is the ventilation, because if you compare the ventilation on this tent to other Coleman tents, it's actually better here with the Coleman Sundome. So for example, if you compare this to the Coleman Sky Dome, I think the Sundome here has a little bit of an edge because it has a back window that allows airflow all the way through the tent, even with the rain fly on, whereas on the Sky Dome, you don't get that. And so if the rain fly is on, you don't get that full airflow through the tent. And this is also made out of a canopy material that is less dense than what you get with something like the Coleman Instant Cabin, and so I think the airflow here is just better. However, I should say, since I mentioned it as a pro, if you compare this tent to just the full tent market, the ventilation here I would say is basically average. It's not nearly as good as some of the more premium and more expensive tents on the market, such as the REI Wonderland, which has really exceptional ventilation, but of course it's also way more expensive than this tent. So that's just something to keep in mind if you compare it to other tents on the market. On to the cons, and let's start with the biggest con, and the main reason that I think people should think twice before buying this particular tent. It unfortunately leaked during my testing. Yes, I did test during 2 days with light to moderate rain, and during that time there was a small leak by the door of the tent. And I was really disappointed when I saw this, because in most other categories this tent actually performed pretty well, either average, maybe a little bit below average, or a little bit above average in most other categories. And for a tent at this price point, that's actually really good, and I was excited to have like a budget tent that performs pretty well to recommend to you folks here on YouTube. But with a tent that has a leak even after the first rain test, I just really have a hard time recommending it. Now you might be wondering where this leak was. Well, in this case, it seemed to be actually through the door zipper, and in particular down the little pole dongle on the zipper. And this is actually kind of surprising because about the bottom half of the door zipper is actually covered in this little rain fly protection strip, which is intended to prevent rain from coming in through the zipper. But in this case, for some reason, it doesn't appear to have worked as it was intended, and there was a bit of a leak on the inside. The second con is really only half a con because it's sort of also half a pro, depending on how you look at it, and that would be the build quality of this tent. So if you look at this tent and just the materials, it has fairly typical budget materials for a Coleman tent. It has the polyethylene floors, it has 68D polyester rain fly and canopy, and it has fiberglass poles that are about 11 millimeters in diameter. That's all fairly typical, but where this gets really interesting is when you start comparing this tent to other Coleman tents, most notably the Coleman Skydome, because the Coleman Skydome is sort of positioned as the upgraded version of the Sundome. But if you came to me and you said, hey, you only have two options. You either buy the Coleman Sundome and the Coleman Skydome, and you ignore price and just go purely by the quality of the tent, then personally, I would choose the Coleman Sundome. And the reason this is so interesting is because the Coleman Sundome is the cheaper option, right? Like that Skydome is more expensive and sort of positioned as an upgraded version. And so why would you buy the Skydome when it's both more expensive and not as good? That's really the question. And so what is it that makes this Sundome better than the Skydome? Well, to me, after using both tents, this Sundome just seems like a sturdier, more well-built tent when compared to the Skydome. And I think the place you see this most notably is in the poles. And so I checked, and the diameter and material of the poles on the Sundome and the Skydome are rated as the same. Unfortunately, I don't have the Skydome here so I can directly compare them anymore, but they're rated as the same. And so if we just assume that the poles are basically made of the same material and they're the same diameter, then it kind of begs the question, like, why is the Sundome more durable? And I have one theory. So here with the Sundome, we have a very simple and basic design. There's little pins on each corner of the tent where you put the ends of the poles, whereas on the Skydome, you have a little bit more complex assembly system, which is intended to make it easier to set up. The back ends of the poles are actually attached to the tent, and then you have sleeves in the front of the tent that you sort of feed the other ends of the poles into. And so my theory is that the complexity of the setup hardware on the Coleman Skydome actually makes it a bit less sturdy and a bit less durable. So that's my theory. I'd have to have them side by side to confirm that, but that's kind of what I'm going with for now. And so basically, long story short, if you don't mind a tent that takes a little bit longer to set up, and you do like to have a tent that is sturdier, then I think the Coleman Sundome is for you, and that's the big reason that the Coleman Sundome would be for me if I was given the choice between the two. So thank you for going on that little lengthy detour with me, and if you're enjoying this video so far, please do hit the like button for me. It helps my channel out a lot. Thanks in advance. And one more con I wanted to just quickly highlight is the storage available inside of this tent. It's quite sparse. You get two small pockets, one on each side. It's really not great. Other tents give you more, but this tent is cheaper than most of those other tents, and so it's kind of a trade-off, but that's something to know about. Now, who should actually buy this tent? Well, as I mentioned with the leak, I really can't recommend this tent, but I can recommend a few of the tents that were in this video. Now, this is a head-to-head test I did of 7 different tents that are all in the budget price range, and the ones I would recommend are a bit more expensive than the Sundome, but they also don't leak, and I think are better in some other ways as well. So I think you'll be really interested in that video. Go check it out. Thanks for watching.